Hey everyone, this is Dr. Casey Johnson. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to the Unlock Wellness podcast. I know you're going to love today's episode with Kate McGoey-Smith. Kate has such an incredible story, so I'm excited to have her on to share it with you guys. If you've been loving the Unlock Wellness podcast, be sure to jump onto iTunes, subscribe, and write a review. It really helps me out a lot, and I really appreciate all of the feedback and support. Also, be sure to follow me on social media to keep up with the latest podcast episodes. The best way to connect with me is on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. My username across the board is at Dr. Casey Johnson. That's DrKaseyJohnsson. You can also check out my website at drkaseyjohnson.com. It has all of the past podcast episodes and more information about each guest under the Listen tab. While you're on my site, be sure to check out the Shop tab where you can check out my first book of my Healthy Children's Book series. Thank you again for listening. I hope this episode leaves you feeling inspired to start making positive changes to your health. Now it's time for today's episode. I hope you love my conversation with Kate McGoey-Smith. Welcome to the Unlock Wellness podcast. I'm Dr. Casey and excited for today's guest. I'm here with Kate McGoey-Smith. And Kate's story is incredible. She's completely transformed her life and health with the plant-based diet. She's lost 110 pounds, was taken off the lung transplant list, and even restored her eyesight. And I'm just excited to have Kate walk you through her story. And I know you're going to leave here feeling extremely inspired. So Kate, thank you so much for taking time to come on. I'm excited to have you.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm feel lucky to be able to meet with your community as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and before we, dive into everything you're kind of working on right now, Kate, I would love for you to just walk people through your journey, kind of where it started, kind of walk us up to the point where maybe right before you started to have those really serious symptoms that you had to deal with.
Yes. Well, I was a busy mother of three. I had a child in grade school, one just beginning junior high, and another in high school. So 3 kids. And my job at the time was, I'm a former registered nurse and I have my master's in clinical social work, and I'm a trained family mediator. And my job was to start from blank paper a free on-site counseling program for an entire rural school board. And 6.5 years later, I found I was supervising 12 counselors in 13 school sites. So I was a pretty busy person. And I also was a homework partner to 3 kids. As I said, I went through grade 6, 4 times, and I finally passed. So I just, I was very busy and I loved my work. When people hear that you're dealing with other people with problems, they often go like, oh, how do you do it? I didn't feel that way at all. I felt like when I have a chance to have that opportunity to companion with someone, to me, I'm companioning with someone with great courage, that they're willing to take a look at their life and look at what changes they need to make and how do they move forward and get themselves, past the situation of crisis, etc. And so my husband often referred to me as the Energizer Bunny because I would be up and running. And it was kind of like I was running an emergency room for emotional first aid, And so every day was a new, different kind of day, and you didn't know what was happening, but I really loved it. And but I noticed that I was getting really sluggish, and I was getting up slower in the morning and taking longer to get dressed. And it was almost like, one of my battery packs was missing. And it progressed over time of that whole year. I had started with a sort of dry, persistent cough, and that was in the fall. And I hadn't paid attention to it. And I think, like most moms or parents, that you fall into that trap of putting yourself last because there seems to be so many needs before your own. And so I had a colleague say to me, in June, wow, Kate, you still have that cough. And I was kind of stunned. And I thought I had so gotten used to it, like the frog that the water is slowly turned up that you don't notice how hot it is. Um, and, um, and so I noticed that I was also getting lower leg swelling, which I kind of put down to maybe heading toward the summertime and a little bit of retention of fluid, but I was getting it also around my abdomen. And when I really kind of reflected back, I had sort of stopped going to the gym. I was going up to 3 times a week, but I'd kind of gone, oh, I'm tired, or I'm this or that. And then I'd also noticed when I looked back too, is that I was putting on my pajamas. Usually when I come home, and most people feel this way, they sort of want to shed their work clothes and go into more casual clothes and kind of have a change when you're doing shift change and doing the home front. It just psychologically, it helps. But I was actually, instead of changing into sweats or something, I was changing into pajamas. And I was starting to go to bed before my kids. And because I just felt like I was just so tired, and I kept thinking, oh, maybe I'm just doing so much. I really could talk myself out of trying to give myself some health care and self-care. But when the swelling got so bad one day, I went, I've got to go to urgent care. And I'm in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and urgent cares here are like kind of mini emergency rooms in the community that we have access to. So I went in and they did a number of tests, and they told me that I had actually type 2 diabetes. And I was really kind of shocked and horrified that I, as a former nurse, wouldn't have picked up on that. But I also know that, fatigue can be put off to something else instead of what it could be is a disease like type 2 diabetes. So in addition to that, they noticed that I had some heart problems as well. And they said, well, we're going to have to do further investigation. And that took about 9 months to investigate. And part of that workup was to go to CIRA, which is a cardiac evaluation risk assessment clinic, as well as have tests for sleep apnea. And I did go to a sleep clinic and discover that I had severe sleep apnea on top of it. So I'm kind of like, was sort of feeling like I was that car that we all have that you think, oh my God, everything's falling apart on it.
Right.
I'm going to have to get a new car because it's sort of beyond repair, except though when it's your body, you can't trade it in, really. You can't.
And I'm sure that's like emotionally exhausting and discouraging.
It is.
Too, and you have 3 kids. Like, I just can't imagine that.
Yeah. So I was just like, and then the second visit to my sleep clinic, they did some retesting, and about a month and a half later, and the specialist, I just had a really funny feeling. Something didn't sit right. And I could just feel like something was going to happen. I didn't know what it was. And she said, well, I just want you to know I'm diagnosing you provisionally with idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. Well, I heard the hypertension part, and I know that stands for high blood pressure. So I was like, just like anybody else, I've seen enough commercials on television, even like, okay, give me the medication. I'll be on my way, get back to my life. I've had it on hold all this time and stressful and everything. And she goes, no, let me explain to you what this is. This is a very rare disease. It only affects 2 to 4 in a million. It's localized high blood pressure. It's in the pulmonary arteries of your lungs. So in fact, you have overall very low blood pressure. And it was true. My blood pressure was like 90/50. And so she said, there's no cause for this and no cure for this. And you only have 2 to 5 years to live, 2 years to live without treatment and 5 years to live with treatment. Wow. And she said, and the treatment is just to try to slow the progression of the disease. And she said, I don't know how you've actually been able to work because your pressures are so high. I'm amazed that you're even standing here right now. So I was and so then she proceeded to send me into the waiting room, which was packed, and with my husband, and I'm just sitting there thinking, I'm looking around the room, and I want to scream I've just been told I'm going to die. I have a terminal illness, but I didn't want to alarm anybody. I guess I'm still a service provider, because I was like, I don't want to alarm anybody else. And I sat there in shock, and my husband and I had to proceed home, and we stopped in the parking lot, and we just started in the car, and we're just burst out crying, both of us, because we were just so shocked and stunned, and how could this happen? And we had no extended family around or anything like that. They weren't even living in the province. My husband's family is from England, and my family is out east in Ontario, so that's way across the country. And remember, almost like, I guess some humor does bounce back, because I said to him at one point, I stopped crying and went, oh my gosh, I think we should leave here because it's really expensive to park in the hospital parking lot. We should cry outside the parking lot. So I was even afraid. I said to him, I don't can you drive? Are you okay to drive? And yeah. And, and then I had to wait 2 weeks for my pulmonologist. And we're fortunate here in Calgary, at Peter Lougheed Center, which is a hospital, we have a clinic for this disease, and it covers all of Lower BC, geographically Lower BC, and another province next to us, British Columbia. People from British Columbia come because, again, of the rarity of the disease. And 2 weeks later, I had something called a right heart catheterization. And that's why I was provisionally diagnosed, because they need to, because the type of drugs they end up giving you are so toxic that if they made a mistake in the actual diagnosis, the drugs alone could kill you. So I was given a right heart catheterization, which involves being awake in the operating room with an ICU bed on call in case you run into more trouble. And they put a wire thread through your carotid artery down through the chambers of your heart into your lungs. You're awake during this whole procedure.
Wow.
And I've had it 6 times now. So I've learned how to be extremely calm and still. You must lie very still for several hours.
Do you feel anything at all with that? Like, do you feel
can feel pressure. You can feel some pressure.
Ooh.
And sometimes they will give you a sedative. And but I just, in all honesty, I kind of just say, like, God, angels, take care of me. And I just lie there and I try to be as still as I can. And the first test they do to you when you initially have this, to test that, first of all, they want to make sure you have this disease before they give you any drugs. But the other thing is they test to see if you'll respond to nitric oxide gas, because nitric oxide helps vasodilate. And what's interesting about this disease is the endothelium cells that are the innermost lining of all our blood vessels and arteries, which we have miles and miles of if we were to stretch them out, it becomes thickened. They don't know why, but with this disease, it becomes thickened. So you can imagine if you had a nice round circle, or a straw, and then it got narrower because you've got this thickened lining. And then on top of that, if you're eating the standard American diet that is high in saturated fat as a result of animal products through meats, fish, and dairy products, is that now you've even narrowed it further. And you've also made your blood, because most standard American diet is all made with a processed product called oil. And even though oil has no nutrients except maybe trace vitamin K, what it does is it slows our blood flow. It slows it from being water to molasses, and it also makes it sticky. So the normal plaque that we normally produce just in our body is just like little fine particles that are going through our bloodstream. Well, they actually, because now the blood is slowing down like molasses, and they're stickier, so all of a sudden it feels like Velcro against the sides of the endothelium. So not only would I have the thickness of my endothelium cells through the pulmonary arterial hypertension, but I would also further narrow them by having a standard American diet.
Right, man. So you're just getting hit like twice, basically.
I am, yeah. I'm actually speeding up, just like all of us are when we eat a standard American diet. Sadly, we don't know that because our customs have been to eat this, and it's just a habit. We just don't, and we don't have the information to make change in those habits often, or realize the seriousness, a need to change those habits. And so our ignorance, unfortunately, and thinking we're doing the right thing is actually causing us harm, unfortunately. It's a little bit like I remind people, we didn't know that smoking at one time would cause cancer. Now we do know that. We didn't know at one time not wearing a seatbelt. We didn't even know about seatbelts for some of us. We didn't have them when we were younger, and now we have them because we know they will actually help us prevent injury in an accident. So new information does come along all the time, and it's whether or not we're going to allow ourselves to be informed and adapt to that new information.
With the how rare that disease was, I mean, I'm
Yes.
sure you started to research it more once you found out that you had it. Was there anybody that reversed it that you came across? Or?
No, in fact, at first they really the doctors discouraged people, I think probably more for psychological reasons, to even look up the disease, because they said there's a lot of sometimes misinformation on the internet. You have to really, anytime we look at the internet, we want to really look at the source. We don't want to just take it at face value. Same with on Facebook or whatever. We want to really look at sources and that kind of thing. And so they really discouraged that. It's interesting, there was only one handbook in all of North America for this disease, and it's actually comes out of the state, I believe out of Bethesda, Maryland. And there was one handbook, and when I was given it by the nurse, she said to me, "I think you can handle this." And my husband and I took it home, and I'm a kind of an index reader. I think it's from all the years of going to university. I want to read a little bit of the front, but I read all the back kind of. I'm interested in what's going on here, and then I dive into parts of it and stuff. Well, when I looked at the back, the contributors, most of them had already passed away, sadly. So it was a really difficult book to go through, to be honest. My husband he's a PhD in chemistry, and so he found he could put on a scientific hat and read it with a little bit of perspective, but it was still very difficult. We had many tears over that book. But at the same time, we could not find any studies, and it led us we just actually submit it for publication in the new whole plant-based journal.
That's awesome.
That's being put out. A publication that we co-wrote, a case study with myself, my husband, and Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn of the Cleveland Clinic. And we've submitted it for publication, looking at the sort of 7 years of data, because my case is excellent for research, to be honest with you, as an anecdotal case, because it has some real, I think, validity and reliability to it, in the sense that I'm so closely monitored through blood tests, either every 2 weeks or monthly. And I have 5 specialists in my life that have examined me up and down the yin yang, that, the only thing I have changed is the food that I've eaten. That is it. And as a result, 15 months later of being on this diet, and I should say how I found out about eating a whole plant-based diet is one night, I was so blind because I lost my sight within months of the diagnosis. So I was so blind that if you went to a vanity mirror and went to brush your teeth, all I'd see from my mouth was a huge black hole. Wow. I literally...
What's the reasoning with the blindness that occurs?
Yeah, my retinologist, Jeff Williams, he told me that there was 3 reasons that I had the blindness. I had diabetic retinopathy. I had a lack of oxygen to my eyes, because that makes sense because I had severe right-sided heart failure.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not getting, it's really hard to get the blood to pump over to the left chamber to get refreshed with new oxygen and brought throughout your body. And then on top of that, it was the drugs I had to take for my idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. And at one point, I turned to him during an exam, and my husband was present at the time. And the reason I say that is that sometimes you think, did I really hear what he said? But I did, and so did my husband. As he said, I said to him, well, what can I do? Like, what, And he said, you know what, Kate, it really comes down to your lungs or your eyes. Which one's more important to you? And you know what? That only took like literally a second. I was not even devastated, like I'd been through so much, but
Yeah.
immediately I thought, my kids need my hugs. They don't really need to, I don't need to see them. And so, I was going to choose my lungs over that. So, I lived with the blindness.
Is that a common symptom they see, or just because you had a couple things happening at the same time?
Well, probably people, the lay public is more familiar with, for example, erectile dysfunction. You may have seen commercials for that. And if you notice that on the commercials toward the end of them, after they did the Cialis and all those kind of commercials, mm-hmm. they'll say kind of very quietly, if you notice some changes in your vision, or you should find that you cannot see, you contact your physician immediately. And what they found is, you see, that, believe it or not, is the very first level drug that you are put on for idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension.
Got it.
So the sildenafil is a vasodilator, but it's not really good to be a combination, for example, with people who are diabetic as well, that they found.
Got it. So you started to have the blindness, and then so kind of where did it go from there?
Well, and then I was actually, just before the blindness, I got on oxygen and got my plastic mustache, I call it. And it was like scuba diving on land because I carried a tank with me. It was easier than trying to use those little carts that are not like nice golfer ergonomically correct carts that anytime you hit a pebble, the cart would turn right over, and so would your wrist be snapped. So it was really painful. So I came up with my own solution. There was sort of a single type of knapsack. It fit a cylinder, but the cylinders are really heavy. But I carried that around, and that gave me a little bit more freedom. But, I was quite a sight. If you could imagine for a minute, someone with a plastic mustache, a big hump on their back from an oxygen tank, and then a white cane. I really looked like the modern elephant man, so to speak. And as a result, that came with a lot of psychological and social isolation, because people, they didn't know what to say, they didn't say anything. And the silence is really deafening, because you start to think, you create a dialogue for yourself in your head that nobody cares, no one's interested, your life is not very worthwhile. And you can imagine why so many patients are actually automatically put on antidepressants when they're given this diagnosis. I never did go on antidepressants, perhaps because of my years of working in mental health. I knew that was only a temporary fix, that you really had to come up with some coping strategies to be able to help yourself, and that's what I was determined to do.
Yeah, no, that's amazing that you did have that determination to not go that route. And then those symptoms happened before you came across the plant-based.
Yes, what happened is, one night I turned on the television. Now, we used to have like just a little 12-inch television that we would, if the kids wanted to watch a video or something, like, it was just not a big deal in our family that way. But when I lost my sight, I ended up donating my library of many years to a domestic violence shelter staff, so they could have, because they really don't have the budget for those kind of books. So I donated that to them. And then, because when I went to read a I try to read, it would take me maybe an hour to read a sentence. Like by the time,
Wow.
then I couldn't remember what the heck. I really felt like a grade oneer. I couldn't remember. I thought I can understand grade oneers being frustrated and tired, not wanting to read, because by the time I finished the assignment, I'm like, what the heck was I reading? It took so much effort. And so my husband, he ended up buying a big screen TV. And so I was so blind, for example, Stephen Colbert, where it says on big letters, comedy. I didn't know that. I didn't know who Stephen Colbert is. I turned on the television because really it's a little bit like when you're blind, sometimes being in prison, like you're cut off by a lot of things. You don't have the visual cues, obviously. And I just heard him and I thought, this guy must be those Fox News people that I kind of heard about. And like, he sounds bizarre. So I turned it off immediately. But one night, my husband was putting the kids to bed and I decided to turn on the television. And up came George Strophanopoulos, who is kind of, he's a CBC, Canadian Broadcasting host, would be like your David Letterman, Stephen Colbert now, that kind of thing. And he came on and he said, I've seen the documentary Forks Over Knives. It changed my life. It just might change yours. And I was and he said, that's all I'm going to say. And then that really got me intrigued. I've always been a curiosity freak kind of thing who loves to learn. And so I was like, wow, I wonder what this is. And I had been very fortunate. I had applied for and received a scholarship through the Canadian National Institute for a Blind, in which I was a client. And it was for a very expensive computer program, which was voice activated. And my intention of using it, when I put in my application, I said that what I want to do is be able to write my children a series of goodbye stories and really try to give them, that would be my gift to them of any wisdoms I could share and everything, because I would never see them graduate from grade school, high school. I would never see them have a boyfriend or girlfriend. I would never know grandchildren. I would never have any of those things. And I just wanted them to know how much I loved them. And so, sorry, that's still, it's hard to, it's easy to get back to that spot again. Yeah. And so I went online and I checked over about Forks Over Knives. And the producer said, I asked, when is it coming to Calgary? And Calgary, for people who don't know, is called Cowtown because there are people who wear cowboy hats and it's very, great Alberta beef. And so it's all, and there's lots of ranchers and, that kind of thing. So very beef centered. And they said, well, we'll let you know. And it did come to an alternative theater. And the alternative theater is like, that's short form for, it's a cheaper theater. And guess what? There were 2 flights of stairs that I had to walk. And that's like asking someone in my condition at that point to be climbing Mount Everest. And I did it, and I did it 3 times because we ended up taking our kids back to see the movies because we sat there in the movie theater at the very front so I could see some stuff. And my husband and I were just stunned. There was Dr. Esselstyn of the Cleveland Clinic. He had been the breast task force, head of the breast task force, in which he did surgeries on people with cancer. And he had decided many years ago, as part of his moving into kind of other fields other than surgery as he headed toward retirement, that he wanted to look at heart disease and how it could be of help to people. And he ended up writing a book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, and looking at over his 20 years of studying people. And it was all on a whole plant-based diet. And one of the things that he had said in the Forks Over Knives was about the endothelium and how oil, for example, can cause tears in the endothelium, and then plaque can get underneath those openings and bulge out into the blood vessel, bulge out so far that with the heavy velocity of the blood that they could tear and end up blocking that artery, and it could, obviously then cause a heart attack or a stroke. And then in addition to that, he talked about, there's lower immunity with oils, and that how whole plant-based foods can really help with our endothelium health and increase nitric oxide. So I was just sitting there going, oh my gosh, we have to, like, this was like amazing to me. Amazing to think that food could truly be a medicine that could be helpful. And because food is something that I would have more control over than I have when I'm dealing with the medical profession and, hey, be a compliant patient, do this, this, and this. And there's 3 meals a day at least that I could have some influence over. So my husband and I, he ended up getting the book. We were just sold on the evidence-based science. And we said to our kids, you know what? They weren't 18, so they are under our responsibility. And we said, this is how, we know that this is the really best way to eat. And we owe it to you to introduce you to this. And what you do as an adult will be up to you, but we need to do it in our family right now. And that's what we did.
That's amazing. So you guys started to implement it, and
like immediately. Now we are very, I have to share with everybody, I was a kitchen klutz. I could open a cardboard box just as good as anybody else. And I love the convenience of that kind of stuff and, all of that. And so you can imagine there I was so weak. I could not stand for maybe more than a minute or two at a kitchen island. That's how weak I was. I'd have to sit in the dining room, and it'd take me a long time. Obviously, when you're blind and you have to cut up vegetables and stuff, not an easy thing. Right. Probably the worst vegetable to cut up was mushrooms. So then I found out that simple Walmart even sells, sliced mushrooms very inexpensively, because I had cut my fingers a number of times, in all honesty.
Or even following a recipe. I mean, it's all of it just so challenging whenever you can't see anything.
Yeah. And it was also scary because we couldn't have a gas stove, obviously, because of my oxygen. But I had to use a 50-foot cord to get around the house. So I was tethered that way. And then it was a little scary sometimes being near the stove. It did scare me, to be honest. I've been a non-smoker, non-drinker my whole life. So I'm kind of lucky that my body had literally not been out of the showcase, so to speak, when I got this disease. But it was a little scary in the kitchen, but I just was really determined. And when I think about my meals back then, I would say I'm glad I was blind, because it didn't taste that good either. But, would have been hard to look at them probably too. But now I can honestly say I feel like I've gone from a 0-star chef to maybe a 4, sometimes a 5-star chef, in all honesty. Amazing. Because and it's all because I really, the food is a lot easier to make. It's easier, it's enjoyable, and energetic, lots of energy to be giving that food. It's interesting, you had mentioned before we started that I had done some podcasts, and I've noticed this, that our podcast is earlier than some, but a lot of the podcasts that I've maybe talked with people on and had the good fortune to do are on like a Friday afternoon. And I sort of smile to myself, because I can remember that I would never want to take anything on a Friday afternoon, because I'd be exhausted by the end of the week. You know what I mean? That would be the last thing I wanted to do. And now it's kind of like Friday is like any other day. I feel great. I don't have to wait till I get up in the next morning to feel good and refreshed. I actually feel pretty energetic throughout the whole day, which is just amazing to me. And that's something for someone like I've been I consider myself to have been in like a major car crash, but other people that may be listening have just had a fender bender. And even though that's really upsetting and stressful, there's easier recovery from it. For example, the fender bender might be that, guess what? You found out that you're pre-diabetic, or that your cholesterol is rising. and your doctor is saying, hey, you got to do something about this. That's kind of the fender bender that allows you to, can get tapped out and you can proceed on your way, and you're not disabled by the side of the road. But mine was a major collision, and that takes a lot of time to recover from. So I'm hoping that people will pay attention to those fender benders so that they can kind of have a chance to realize that, maybe a little more driver ed, a little bit more education on the food front, that food can be your friend, and be really helpful to you.
Absolutely. And I love that example. That's super well said. And I love just how much gratitude you now have, and just appreciation you have for noticing those small things. Like,
yes,
I have energy on a Friday afternoon. Like, that's something that most people don't think about. So, if you're listening, and if you haven't had that fender bender yet, like, really take that in and appreciate that, and do what you can to not have to get to that point, So I think I love that appreciation. And, Kate, when you started to really, you guys just dove full in on eating.
We did. And you know what? There's about 5 levels when you embrace a whole plant-based diet. And we kind of went in level 3, where you just sort of go all in. Yeah. But we probably needed to do a couple. The first 2 levels are more around the why and the how. And so we had to kind of go track backwards. So that's why we had some major bends and turns, and it wasn't like all smooth sailing, because we didn't have some of the why understanding. We didn't have some of the how experience of how to implement it. And so I realized that, but it was really important for us. And people will sometimes say, and it may be tempting for your listeners to sort of say, well, radical thing. And yet I can tell you that I was responsible for, my husband and I and another patient started a support group. And I did it for over 5 years. And people saw me progressively get better. And yet nobody asked me, how come? No one was interested in the food I was eating. And I have to be honest, of my 5 specialists, they've all been wonderful. But there's only been one who's actually talked to me at all about my food. Nobody else has. And they've never suggested another patient talk to me or anything, despite going from being blind to sighted, despite being on oxygen, even up to 6 liters, down to 0, and just then having some at night, being able to not be able to exercise or even walk across, the distance of across 2 driveways, on a sidewalk. I could probably faint at that point. That would be too much for me. I'd have to stop very still and then take a rest and then try to get to the next driveway. And now I exercise up to an hour a day, every day, 7 days a week. No one has ever asked me any of those things.
That's crazy, Kate. And like, what do you think was, if you can remember, like when you started to dive in and really make those changes, maybe that first sign of success, or like you're like, man, this is actually working. I'm noticing, like you said, maybe the oxygen level that you were having to decrease, or like, what was the first thing you kind of noticed?
A couple things that I noticed is that we had moved into a bungalow for 5 years. We were in a 2-story house. And part of the reason was our kids were still in school in that community, and we didn't want to disrupt their schooling too much. And then there was also the financial burden of trying to move and sell when I was so ill. So it meant that I was actually housebound for about 5 years. It was kind of like I was doing being house arrest. I said, gee, I could have served time for other people this way. And I thought I hadn't even committed a crime as far as I was knew. But we had a sort of, between our family room and past our dining room to get to our bedroom sort of area, there was a bench there, and I used to have to rest on the bench just to try to make the next loop to the bedroom kind of thing. And I started to realize, oh, I'm not doing that. And I also had very strong glasses, And I found myself forgetting to put on my glasses, yet I could see some stuff. So I was like getting like really suspicious, like what? And I have to say that after I'd seen the movie, I would like to share that because I had severe right-sided heart failure, I decided to write to Dr. Esselstyn, because on his website, dresselstyn.com, he invites people with heart problems to write to him if they would like. And so I wrote, and his secretary, Jackie Frey, contacted me within 2 days and said, Dr. Esselstyn will speak to you. He wants to talk to you. And I was just thrilled. It was like, wow, the Beatles are going to do a show for me, or the Pope called or something. I was screaming at the top of my lungs.
Amazing.
And then I ended up talking to him, and he is a surgeon, and I, having worked in the operating room, are familiar with surgeons, and he's very directive with a very kind heart, but just very firm, and said, this is what you need to do. And I followed exactly what he said. And he said, you need to take a fistful of greens, and you can steam them either, microwave or boiling water. And a fistful is about a cup. And you have to eat it 6 times a day: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and in between, and at bedtime. And he said, what you're eating is nitrates, and that's going to increase your nitric oxide. That's going to increase your vasodilation. And that, we hope, will help you. And so I did that, and then that was about at the end of November of 2012. And then I had made a decision when I found out a friend of mine had had a lung transplant but never got out of the hospital. And I was just devastated. That very same day, for the first time that I had ever known, John McDougall was offering a 5-day stay at his center. It wasn't the usual 10-day where you're in-house, but this was like a 5-day. It's now been reduced to a 3-day. It's equivalent to his 3-day. And we decided to go to it. And my son had helped raise some money through friends and church and stuff. Unbeknownst to me, I had been talking about that. And we went, and it was really helpful because he gave me some more of the whys in the hows as well. And we started December 1st of 2012 to eat this way. And then 15 months later, I got my sight back and started to feel so much better. I still couldn't exercise at that point, even 15 months later. But finally, it took over a year to try to, be able to start to exercise. And then I could do that as well.
That's amazing. That's what I was going to ask you, how long it really took for thing to kind of go into remission somewhat. So 15 months later,
I got my sight back, and I ended up off oxygen.
Wow.
And these were gradual. And I will share with you, when we were at John McDougall's program, he said, don't just give it 30 days. Like, give it enough time that you really can sort of see some difference. So that, and I really put on that researcher hat and said, I'm going to, so I started December 1st. I gave myself to April 8th, which is my birthday. And I said, what, I'm going to promise myself on my birthday, I can eat whatever I want. Like if it's an ice cream sundae or something, anything. And I have to be honest, those first few weeks, I would go to bed, which I never dreamed about food before that I was aware of. And I would be dreaming about like a banana split or something, like, because I always thought a banana split at least has a banana in it, it's a little healthy. And I thought, that's what I'll have on my birthday. Because some of the food, to be honest, at first your taste buds are adjusting. It takes about 30 days for your taste buds to adjust. And then it takes about 90 days to get over the fat craving. So, and you're also learning, you're having to, it's not like you're learning from blank paper, you're unlearning. You have to first have the process of unlearning something and then now learning something new. So there's a double task there that can be a little bit difficult. And then the third aspect of it is other people's reaction to it.
Yep.
People are they're coming out of a place of being worried for your health, thinking it's scary. For example, when I had reached out to some relatives to try to raise some money to go to the States, because of course my husband would have to take off work and I had only some disability money, it was just like overwhelming to try to think how we were going to manage this. I actually had a relative leave a phone message back. I was asking even for like could someone's spare $5, like anything to contribute. And she said, like, well, I've talked to everybody and we've all agreed that it's really immoral of what you're doing. It's totally irresponsible. If you should get sick in the States, you have no insurance, you could lose everything. Your children won't have a home to live in. It was pretty bad. It was pretty condemning of what I was doing. And I had to stop and think, because I think every feedback deserves some contemplation. And so I thought about it, and then I realized a couple things. I thought to myself, now, just a minute. If I said to my kids, the reason I never got any help was because I'm a parent, and parents have to put their needs last, are they going to likely want to become parents ever? Like,
Right.
That's a pretty tall order to ask anyone to do when their life is on the line. The second thing was, I had promised my kids when I got sick, they never knew the full extent of my illness, because I did not want to burden them until they were ready. And so what I said to them is, I have a serious illness, and what I can promise you is I can try to take worry away from you. What I can do is I'm going to try my very best to do whatever I can to be as healthy as possible. I promise you that. And I will answer your questions as honestly as I can. And my youngest daughter didn't find out how terminal my illness was till she was actually in grade 11.
Wow.
So over 5 years late, and that was because by accident, the lung transplant clinic had called and they left a message, and she said, and they don't normally do that, they don't identify themselves. And there was obviously an error. And she said, hey, Mom, how come a lung transplant? Like, what's going on? Because she knew I had a disease of the lungs. But,
Yeah.
And I'd asked them not to go on the internet, because I said there's a lot of misinformation and everything. I'll go, if you really want to go, I'll go on with you. But please promise me that you'll respect that, so that I can help you explain and Dad can help you explain what's going on. So slowly, as like when my son was in grade 11, he was in biology, he came to me and started asking more questions and stuff like that. So they slowly, each of them found out. And, I thought that was really important, but there was these relatives saying like, no. And so I thought, well, I'm not living up to my promise to my kids to try my very best. And then the third thing is, I thought, if this was one of my children, would I really care whether I had a rented roof or an owned roof?
Right.
Or would I just give everything up to help save my children?
Exactly.
And it was like, I would give everything up. I would never have a hesitation with that. They don't care what roof it's under.
What country you're in.
Yeah. A hug is a hug, whatever roof you're under, and love is love, whatever roof you're under. So we made the decision to go, but my husband is, as I said, he's got his PhD in chemistry, and he's actually an environmental risk analyst. And so I said to him, will you do a risk assessment on me, and how do we get me there and back as safely as possible? So we take the lowest risk to our whole family and our financial means and everything. So we figured out like emergency routes to get to Canada again, because we were going to Santa Rosa, California, which is, believe, about 2.5 hours north of San Francisco. And we knew that if I got sick, they would never let me fly back on a plane. So we had all this stuff figured out. Like, is it safer to drive? Is it safer to go by bus? Like all these, just all these logistics. So that one question really made us even extra cautious, but we wanted to do it in a responsible way, and we felt it was well worth it. And when I think about it, if I hadn't gone, I really wouldn't have understood how to implement it as well. And I'm not saying that you have to go to that program, but it's really helpful to get as much information, and people can do that through YouTube videos, reading books, watching DVDs. Like, I've watched Forks Over Knives many times over.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Like, just all of those. And there's so much more now in comparison to when I even started in 2012. There's so much more information. But I'm really grateful that I went. because it was a very helpful, it really gave that extra oomph to it, and to us get going. And we actually cleaned our pantry before we left. Like, we did know we had to clean out our pantry, and we did all of that so that when we came home to a house that was whole plant based, and we're ready to take that on.
I love that. And to kind of, for a second, to go back on just how fast, or, the time that it took for everything to really resolve. I mean, as far as the pulmonary condition, I know you were taken off the lung transplant list. So, like, how did that even happen? Are you completely cleared of that condition, or it's still there but not as serious?
No, I still, this condition will never leave me.
Okay.
There are 4 levels according to the World Health Organization. So I was between a kind of level 3 to 3.5. And I've actually now, for the last several years now, I've been found to be at a level 1, which is unheard of. And I was going to mention that the study that my husband and I and Dr. Esselstyn, the paper we wrote, when my husband did an international search, there was a study out of England using beetroot juice, which beets obviously are higher in nitrates and then producing nitric oxide, but they didn't change the person's overall diet. And there was another study out of Sweden, but they only did it for, I believe, a week, and that was it. And so this would be quite a landmark to, at least what we hope is, we know one case study, it's one person, so people could just go, what's the big deal? However, we hope it will spark an interest and ignite an excitement of, hey, this maybe should be a route that we could investigate. And it's by way of health economics, my drugs were anywhere from my oral drugs were anywhere from $36,000 a year to then having to have an IV, a pump infusion that put in droplets on a continuous basis to $100,000 a year.
Crazy.
And so now it costs me probably under $5 a day in comparison.
That's amazing. How many years has it been since your actual diagnosis?
I was diagnosed in my official diagnosis, and the start of my drugs was December 20th, 2007. So literally sort of 5 years later, I ended up finding out about this. And I was blind for several months as the diet started to take effect. Yeah. But so I feel like really amazing that I survived, because we started the support group with probably about 10 people, and I'm probably one of 2 that is left of that original group.
And Kate, because of what you specialize in professionally too, I also want to touch on, because obviously everything that you've gone through has been on like an extreme level, right? But for people just changing their health in general, no matter what level, there's a level of like social and psychological factors that are happening that we were discussing before we started recording that really talked about enough. They're not really pushed, but that is a huge aspect of anybody wanting to change
any health behavior for sure, Casey. I think that and you understand that in your practice as well, is that when we're asking people to, medical doctors find, for example, the whole issue of compliance is huge, even in taking a drug.
Right.
So you can imagine if you're asking someone to change something like a meal, that food is associated with all sorts of customs, with comfort, culture, traditions. If I said to you 5 years from now, what are you going to serve during the holiday season in December? You would probably know, you probably know exactly what you're going to serve. Well, my family always did this. On my mom's side, we did this. And then, if you have a partner, my partner's family did this. And so you end up merging traditions. And often people find that first year of marriage, it's kind of rocky, because that merging of traditions is creating a new habit. We all understand that. We want to be respectful of other people's choices, but at the same time, we have certain comfort and familiarity with other habits that we have and traditions. And so I'm really particularly interested in the psychological and social aspects to it. And this can feel quite alone because even though 2019 is considered the year of the vegan, we have even within the vegan group, we have some differentiation, because we can have someone who's vegan and go into McDonald's and have fries and a Coke, and that is vegan for sure.
Top them off with some Oreos and they're all
exactly
set. Right.
Yeah. And or if you go in as a whole plant-based person, you're probably going to look at the menu and go, I'll have apple slices and water, thank you.
A plain baked potato, and if there's any oil, then just cut that.
Exactly. And so it's like, so there's a really difference in nutrients. And unfortunately, because we have vegans who suffer from heart disease and diabetes, and they're protecting the animals and the planet, but they're not ending up protecting human life, which is just as equally important. And so it's the whole plant-based, I always say it's sort of a description of how we eat. It's not a condemnation of anything. It's a description of how we eat. And what we're trying to do is say, you know what? Our money is important to us, for sure. And I want to and money is a resource, and I want to maximize my resource and get as many nutrients out of that resource, and also without causing harm to other things. For example, what we put on our plate can actually preserve our planet as well, and the animals on it. So we can actually feel really good just by what one person picks up on their fork can really, when we think about how, for example, in the field of recycling, at one time it was really strange. You're going to do what? Save the cans. You're going to do what? Hand in this bottles and that bottles. And now we realize how much that is helping when everyone gets united. So if even people who are really hardcore meat eaters, if in their family they said, well, we're only having meat on Mondays and the rest of the week,
makes a huge difference.
And in fact, it really fits with T. Colin Campbell's work through Cornell University of saying, like, it's not about being perfect 100%. It's like if you even ate this way 80% of the time, you would be so much better and healthier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, also, Kate, we were talking a little bit before we started recording too, like how valuable this community is, because like you were talking about that factor of feeling alone. And when you don't feel like you have the support of friends and family, I get how it would be very hard to stick with it. But some of I have met some like extremely close friends, connections just through, obviously I reach out to a lot of people through this podcast, but using communities online as a way of helping yourself stay accountable and feel like this is normal, this is okay, like it's okay because they're doing it too. It's just such a valuable resource.
We are social creatures, and our need to belong is no different than our need for food, clothing, and shelter. It's just as important. We need, we're very tribal. And so, for example, Fork Smart, we offer an oil-free, whole plant-based potluck once a month with a vegetation. And we do that in our community. And in fact, if other people are interested, they can go on forksmart.org, and we've created a potluck kit. It's very low price, and it walks you through how to even set up a potluck, little menu cards, all that, everything you absolutely need to do your own potluck. And it can start in your home, and then it could start in a church basement, then it could start in a community center. Maybe a school would allow you to do something like that. So that's something that people could get at forksmart.org, because we want it to be available to as many people as possible. We even have accompanying lessons, like for sort of education for people too, with menu item ideas. And then the other thing we offer is every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, and that's Mountain for Canada and US, we offer Staying Power, which is addressing the social and psychological challenges that face someone following a whole plant-based diet. And that's not to make it sound like, oh, this is so difficult, you need an extra this or that. What it really is anytime we're making changes, it's no different than if someone took up bicycling or they took up a particular sport. They would want to have those supports in place of other people doing it so that they can learn from it. And so we talk about, and psychological stress comes from all sorts of things, like from what to eat to how do I talk to somebody about it? What do I do with a divided table where I have, there's some family members eating this way, other family members who refuse to or won't consider it. Like just talking through some of those ideas about it and just hearing that other people face those challenges too can be really reassuring, actually.
Yeah, 100%. And I love that you do provide that level of education. I think it's life changing. It is. And I'm definitely going to put that link in the show notes, Kate. That way people can go click and check out
it's
all
on
of these resources.
the Staying Power is on Zoom. So it's just an easy, people don't have to join Facebook or anything. They get it in their email and they get a click. And we have it as a meetup group, and we actually give you the codes right there as well. So, and then ForkSmart has a newsletter once a month, so we always have it in the newsletter. We include an article and a recipe in our newsletter as well. And our articles are really focused around more of just social and psychological issues. For example, I'm writing one on happiness, and it's interesting that what they found is kind of like what comes first, if you're in a good mood, do you eat healthier or does being healthy help you put you in a good mood? Well, what they found is it's a wonderful feedback loop, is that the more healthy foods you eat, the more comforted you feel from those healthy foods, that you don't have to reach out with a craving to get that satisfied. You already feel so good, and it invites you to eat healthier than in the next bite as well.
That's amazing. No, definitely sign up for that newsletter, guys, if you're listening. It's extremely, extremely interesting. And Kate, you're just helping so many people. And I know you've had a lot of features, like, you've had your Forks Over Knives features and so many others. How has the feedback been from people that have reached out to you? Because I'm sure there's been a lot of people reaching out to you with questions or help them so much on their own journey. How has that been for you?
It's been really heartening, because even people starting that first step, I sort of see it as planting seeds of information for people. They may not use it right now, but they at least can recall it when they feel like there's a need. Sometimes we have to be at a point of crisis before we say enough is enough, and other times we can raise that bottom and say, why do I want to end up getting into a major car crash? I want to stop this before it even happens. And I want to feel better. And that's why many people exercise before they go, I can't even move my body anymore. They want to do that. And so I've heard from people around the world, Singapore, Sweden, England, Ireland, and lots of parts of the United States. And I also offer a free half-hour consultation for people if they want. And on the forksmart.org, my phone number's there and my email address. And so it's really easy to get a hold of me if they want to.
I love it. And I know we just covered a bunch of things you're working on through ForkSmart and everything you're doing there. But is there anything else that you're doing in the future that you?
Yeah, we are doing on May 11th. We do it as a cost recovery. We're doing the ForkSmart Summit. It's going to be in Calgary, Alberta. It's Saturday, May 11th. And we're featuring 3 wonderful international speakers. Dr. David Jenkins, he's an MD. He's the creator of the glycemic index.
Very cool.
It's amazing. He's University of Toronto, and he's an Order of Canada recipient. And he became vegan several years ago. So he's got a really interesting story, and he's really much into sustainability and diet. And then Dr. Doug Lyle, who is featured in Forks Over Knives and co-author of The Pleasure Trap. So he'll be there to talk about The Pleasure Trap. And then Jane Esselstyn is coming. She's the daughter of Caldwell and Ann Esselstyn. And she's a researcher and registered nurse. and a cookbook author of, people may be familiar with the Engine 2 cookbook and the Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease cookbook. So she'll be giving a talk as well as a cooking demonstration.
That's awesome. And no, that really is an amazing lineup. That sounds
Right.
amazing. And Kate, I do have to say too, because you're in Canada, that I am extremely jealous of your new food guidelines. So
Yes, yeah. I had written to Essie and Anne about it, and they were really thrilled, and so was Jane to hear that. And we're pretty thrilled up here because what it's giving people is a more it's starting the dialogue open. It's by no means perfect, but at least it's starting the dialogue open. And so then when we're starting to even talk about plant-based foods, people aren't kind of like scratching their head. It's becoming more and more familiar. And it also allows for, our country is known as not a melting pot, but a mosaic. We always talk about that all our cultures with the diversity make a beautiful mosaic of beautifully colored tiles that we enjoy the beauty of everybody's culture. And so this really honors it because we have cultures that, in fact, are actually lactose intolerant. And so that's not about depriving your children. It's a health issue. And the other thing is that we can get all our nutrients in a much easier and less damaging way to our body without using animal products. And that's exciting too.
So exciting. No, I just think the work that you guys are doing is incredible. Just as a country, just really being progressive with that. I really respect it. And Kate, I mean, the work that you're doing as well in your story is just amazing. It blows me away.
Thank
you. Yeah. What is the best way, Kate, for people to follow you on social media? That way they can keep up with your story.
Yeah, we have Instagram, Fork Smart Canada is on Instagram. And then our tweets are under Fork Smart. And then, of course, our forksmart.org, our newsletter. And Facebook is Fork Smart as well. So
perfect. No, I'll add all of those to the show notes. That way people can just go click and give you guys an ad.
Great. Thank you so much.
No problem. And Kate, just closing question that I ask every guest. But if you just had one piece of advice for the audience, maybe it's been something that's been your biggest takeaway through your own wellness journey so far. But if you just had one piece of advice to give, what would it be?
I think that to recognize that bottom line, self-care is self-love, is that it is really important. It ends up paying dividends back when we take care of ourselves and start paying ourselves first. And what I mean by that is, making sure maybe a little meditation in the morning, that you have your breakfast, that you exercise, that you do all those things to take care of yourself first so that you can, even though we have a desire, a feeling for community, and we want to be of help to others, that by helping ourselves first, we are going to end up being in a much better situation of being able to serve others in our lives and have great deal of satisfaction with that and have the energy to do it as well.
Love it. No, Kate, that's perfect. And just, again, thank you so much for taking time to come on. I really loved having you, and I'm excited to keep up with everything that you are doing, all the work you're putting out there. So thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you for this opportunity, Casey. I really appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a happy, healthy day today.
Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you loved my conversation with Kate. She's doing so much positive work, so be sure to give her a follow on social media to keep up with everything that she's been working on. You can find her social media links that she talked about in the episode in the show notes, but you can also find them on my website as well at drkaseyjohnson.com. That's drkaseyjohnson.com. Click on the Listen tab. Then from there, you'll be able to see all of the past guests that have come on the Unlock Wellness podcast, read a little bit about each guest, and be able to click on their social media links, websites, all of that. So all of Kate's information can be found on my site as well. If you guys loved today's episode with Kate, be sure to jump onto iTunes, subscribe, and write a review. It really helps me out a lot, and I really appreciate all of the feedback and support. Thank you guys so much again for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you loved it. I hope it inspires you. And most importantly, I hope you take action.